Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Diane Burnett, and I am a member of the HBCU Academic Librarian OER project team at South Carolina State University. This project is sponsored by a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. On behalf of Dr. Ruth Hodges, Principal Investigator and Interim Dean of the Library and Information Services at South Carolina State University, as well as other members of the project team, I'd like to welcome everyone to the second program in our series of professional development webinars on topics related to open education resources. Before we begin the program today, I have just a few announcements to share. First, all microphones are automatically muted for this program to prevent audio interference. Again, we will mute all microphones throughout the program to prevent unintentional audio interference. If you have a question, please feel free to place your question in the chat window, because we have staff monitoring the chat window, and they will relay your question to the presenter. Also, the presenter will periodically pause throughout the presentation today to ask questions to the audience, and you can place your responses to her questions in the chat window, and one of our staff members will again relay your response to the presenter. We want to make sure that we get a record of all of our attendees today. So we're asking that you please type your name, your institution or organization, as well as your email address in the chat window so that we will have a record of those who are in attendance today. This webinar is being recorded, and the link to the recording will be available on the project website. And you will see the URL to our project website placed in the chat window at the end of today's presentation. The speaker has also graciously agreed to share her PowerPoint presentation. So we'll make those slides available on our website as well. And finally, we welcome your feedback on the program today. And the link to the online evaluation form will be emailed to everyone attending the live presentation within the next few days. So again, in the next few days, we'll make the recording of the webinar available. We'll make the PowerPoint slides available on our project website. And our project staff will make sure that everyone that's in attendance today, you will be emailed a link to our online evaluation for the webinar, because again, your feedback is very important to us as we seek to continue this webinar series. So at this time, it is my esteemed pleasure to introduce our presenter, Ms. Katie Miller. Ms. Miller has been the library director at Aiken Technical College in Aiken, South Carolina since 2009. She was named the 2020 Innovator of the Year by the South Carolina Technical Education Association for her work with accommodating all learning styles in the library. She's also a member of the Affordable Learning Committee with Pascal, which is a consortia of South Carolina academic libraries, and has led multiple workshops on open textbooks for college faculty and librarians across the state of South Carolina. She has attended several conferences about open education, including Open Ed and the Open Textbook Network Summer Institute. She is passionate about making higher education accessible to everyone. So we are delighted to have Ms. Miller come and share with us today on the topic of OER as a social justice mission. Give me one moment, and then Mrs. Miller will come before you.
Okay. Diane, okay for me to get started?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. I am super excited to be here with you guys today. This is a topic that I have gotten very passionate about over the last couple of years. Ironically, my interest in open educational resources came from a request from my supervisor to get interested in it. The more I got interested in, the more I learned about OER, the more I got interested, and that interest grew into a passion over the last couple of years. So last fall, I attended Open Ed in Phoenix, Arizona, and I attended a presentation by Jacob Jenkins from California State University, Channel Islands. And his presentation really left an impression on me. And there was one quote that something he said that to this day remains my pinned tweet on Twitter. And it sticks with me every day that I go to work or that I work from my couch these days. And that is that a student's learning potential should never be limited by their purchasing power. And this to me is why we work on moving our courses to open educational resources. It's a powerful statement. And when you stop and think about it, no student should have to choose about buying a textbook or putting a meal on their table. And that's the effect that open educational resources can have on our students. So we're looking at the issue today from both social justice and socioeconomic points of view. How do students affect our students, and why do they affect our students more in these categories? So we're going to look at a lot of statistics and just talk about why these things are an issue. So let's look at some numbers. We're going to start with the average net price of college, which has increased dramatically for those students who are in the bottom 25% of income brackets. You'll see that for the top, the 50% of our students, it's remained relatively stable. It's changed maybe about 5% over the last 45 years. But for students who are in that lowest income bracket, it's gone from about a 42% share up to 84, which is a huge increase. Obviously, a lot that can be correlated with how higher education funding has changed over the years, but there's a lot of other factors that are playing into why our students are struggling, because frequently those students who are in that bottom 25% have a lot of financial aid that can be made available to them to help pay for college. But this is, there's more behind this. So when a student can't pay out of pocket for college, and most students don't pay for college out of pocket these days, loans become the fallback. And that factor alone can have a huge impact on their future success. They are 36% less likely to own a home 10 years after they finish college if they have significant student loans. For every $5,000 in student loan debt, there is a 5% decrease in those students attaining their career goals. They're more likely to live at home with their parents after college. They're more likely to take the first job that's offered to them out of college because they know they have bills to pay, and they know that they have to start working on paying those back. So they're more likely, instead of taking the best paying job or the best opportunity for them, they're more likely to take that first job, which is probably going to be a lower paying job. And a result of all of this is that their credit scores are worse. And another impact that all of this has is that it's harder for those students to then own a car, because they're not able to get a car loan to help them pay for a car, and then they start having transportation issues in terms of being able to get to and from work. So it has this huge ripple effect for our students. So how can we help? Well, textbooks. That's, as faculty, this is something that we have control over. We don't have control over how much tuition and fees are. We don't have control over how much their house costs and how much food costs, but we do have a direct impact on our students with the cost of the textbook for our courses. And college textbook prices have increased over 1,200% since 1977. They have outpaced the increases in healthcare and housing and inflation in general. You know, we all hear a lot about the cost of healthcare and how it's rising and how it's gotten so expensive for everyone, but you don't hear, unless you're in the circle that talks about the cost of textbooks all the time, you don't hear about the cost of how fast college textbook prices have been rising, particularly over the last 20 years. So this is a huge issue for our students. So the Florida virtual campus, which is an office that unfortunately no longer exists, they lost their funding this year through a veto from the governor's office. But they had a survey that they sent out statewide 3 times. They did it in 2012, and then they did it again in 2016 and 2018. So unfortunately, we won't be getting this survey again moving forward, but the data that we got from this survey is super helpful in understanding how students are affected by textbooks. So when they did the survey in 2018, they found that the overall cost of textbooks for students had decreased in those 2 years. And that was because in Florida, there is a lot of initiative happening from the top down to get faculty to start moving to open educational resources. And so because of that, there is now a larger number of courses that are using OERs, and so the overall cost of textbooks for students has gone down. But there are still negative impacts on with textbook costs on the students in that state. They're still seeing 64% of them do not buy their required textbooks, which is a lot. 43% of them take fewer courses, which then means it takes them longer to graduate college. 41% of them don't register for a course because of the price of a textbook, and 23% of them wind up dropping a course because of the cost of the textbook. All of these numbers are much higher than they should be. So what are the impacts of those choices on students? Well, 36% of them said that they earned a poor grade because they did not purchase a textbook or they delayed purchasing a textbook. 20% of them said that they failed a course because of the cost of the textbook. And so, you know, there is, and I'm sure that we've all experienced this in our own worlds, is at some point you take a class in college where you are given a textbook that is required, and then you wind up not using it. And that then has a negative impact on your choice to purchase textbooks moving forward. You're less likely to buy those required textbooks until you go to class, you make sure you're actually going to use it. And so what winds up happening is some students keep putting it off, and then they don't have it, and they're already starting out of the gate unsuccessful because they don't have that book in hand. So one of the things that they looked at was where students are getting their textbooks from. And you'll see from here that the biggest change in this survey is how students are now renting digital textbooks at a significantly higher rate than they were the 2 years prior. So we're starting to see, you know, there are some kids who do not learn well with an ebook. And I have a child in a college-age child in my house that's like that. She doesn't like digital textbooks. She likes printed copies. But we're starting to see students, because they can see that there is a benefit by getting them digitally, and that's usually cost related, they're starting to move a little bit more towards digital textbooks. But there are a lot of students in this survey across the board that are doing everything they can to not purchase that book from the campus bookstore. So most of our students do not use the campus bookstore to purchase books, and that's because of cost. You're more likely going to pay more by going to the campus bookstore than you are by finding it any other way possible, just because of cost. So the other survey that I want to share with you is the California State University Channel Islands survey. This is a survey of about 700 students at this one institution, but the reason I share this is because they have a very diverse campus. about 70% of their students identify as non-white, and about 50% of their students are Hispanic. So the survey results they get are very different than most campuses, but it kind of gives us a little bit more insight into those types of populations and where they're struggling with textbooks. But they also looked at it from a point of view of first-generation college students, which a lot of, so they're looking a little bit more into the demographics of their students as related to textbook cost as some of the other surveys, which are just doing a general survey. So, so they had 705 student surveys, and 89% of their students experienced increased stress due to textbook costs, which is huge. That's, I mean, that's a huge number for stress. And 80% of them did not have a textbook on the first day of class because of cost. So all of these numbers are super high at CSUCI. And that's a problem. And that's why they are working very hard out there to start moving towards OER. So one of the things they looked at was students who are low income and financial aid dependent students to see if there was a difference in their stress levels with textbooks. And those numbers were indeed higher. So those students, over 90% of the students who are financial aid dependent are experiencing more stress due to textbook costs than those who are not financial aid dependent. And over 82% of them do not have that textbook on the first day of class. So these are not great numbers, but it's important to look at them. So why, we're gonna pause here for a second, and I'd love to hear why you think financial aid dependent students are more affected by textbook costs than those that are not financial aid dependent.
And this is, Dr. Burnett, as a reminder, you can place your answers in the chat window, and one of our staff members will just share a couple of those.
Okay. One question I have is, what is the source of your economic statistics?
You mean from the slide from the beginning?
Well, this is just a question coming from Dr. Hodges.
Okay, so these surveys, everything is linked at the end of this presentation. So there are links to all of the sources of information throughout the presentation. And there is, unfortunately, because the Florida Virtual Campus office was closed, that survey is no longer, that website is no longer active, but that survey data is out there. So I will try to find a new link to that before I share the presentation with that.
And I think this is kind of like the same question from someone else. Would it be possible to receive links to these surveys? But I think you've answered that.
Yeah, so there are links at the end of the presentation with to all of the sources of information throughout the presentation. But I will definitely try to find a new one for that Florida Virtual Campus survey because it's a really good survey.
Okay.
So right now, what we're trying to do right now, Ms. Goodwin, is just, we'll hold off on responding to questions. Ms. Miller is trying to get responses from just one or two to her question. And that is, why do we think that financial aid dependent students are more affected by textbooks costs? So if you could just maybe read a couple of responses. I'm seeing some in the chat window, but maybe you can just read out a couple of the responses from the audience.
One comment affecting short term or long term. In the short term, they may have to delay purchasing. In the long term, they will be forced to repay that money, resulting in higher loans than those who might be able to pay out of pocket.
Thank you.
Often financial aid is not released prior to classes starting, so a student strapped for money will not be able to purchase a book prior to day one.
Yeah, so these are great responses. It's really not at all unusual for students to not have access to their financial aid on day one. And also, I believe there was a comment about that they don't realize that that they have to include the cost of textbooks when they're looking at their financial aid. So and then that's less money that they have for other things. So yes, and Caroline, I completely, Manny said about socioeconomic challenge, students have less experience with strategies to find lower cost materials, which is absolutely correct. Those students don't have necessarily the same support system that others might have to, or know to go into a librarian and ask for help for finding a textbook at a cheaper price. So yes, students are absolutely affected by financial aid because they frequently have to wait for it. And so the story that I always share with us is that we had a student that walked in. So we have course reserves in non-COVID times. We have course reserves on our campus that provide students with access to print copies of some of our textbooks, those that don't also require an access code. And so we get a lot of students that walk in the door asking if we have a certain textbook. And most of the ones we have are kind of those 100 level introductory courses, because those are the largest groups of students that need things. So we had a young man that came in and he asked if we had a specific accounting textbook, which we did not. And it was about 3 weeks into the semester. And he came and asked if we had it. And I said, no, sir, I'm sorry, we don't. And he had just gotten his financial aid. 3 weeks into the semester, he had just gotten his financial aid. And the bookstore had sold out of the book and they weren't going to order anymore. And so he was at a loss of what to do, because our students don't get their financial aid refunds until about 6 weeks into the semester. And he straight up told me he could not afford to buy the textbook himself. And so he just didn't know what he was going to do. And there was just not enough time for me to try to help him find a copy from somewhere else. He wasn't going to get it in time. And so, you know, it's hard to know that these problems are out there until a student comes to you. And so that, you know, there's so many cases of students like this. And one of the things I always try to do as a librarian is to give them some search strategies to try to find things elsewhere, so they can try to get a textbook, whether it's through our finding used copies on other websites, or, you know, sometimes we have our religion professor uses just regular books that we can get through other libraries if our copies are checked out. So we always try to help our students find ways to get books until they're able to purchase their textbooks if they need their own copies. So it goes right back to that average net price of college as share of average family income. They may not have $200 or $300 to shell out for one textbook until their financial aid refunds come back. So it's a huge barrier to success for our students. And you're going to hear me say that a few times today, that our students really struggle with these types of things. And anytime you put up a barrier to success, they get frustrated, and it becomes so easy for them to just walk away. So they also looked at the statistically significant results for first generation college students. And just to see how students who were first generation, to see if they were more affected by textbook costs than non-first generation. And they were. You know, the increased stress is very similar to the financial aid dependent students. It's slightly higher, but they are much more likely to fail a class due to textbook costs. And they're, you know, and they're more likely to not have a textbook at all due to cost. So there's an even bigger impact on those first generation students that we need to be aware of when we're working with students and try to help them navigate the system. So a second question from me, why do you think that first generation students are more affected than non-first generation students?
I see one as a, let me go back down. It's just going. As a first generation student, I had no idea where to get books other than the university bookstore. And another one said not prepared.
Yeah, so, you know, I grew up in a college town and in a college household. But my children have very good friends who were first generation college students. And I told them all before they went off to college, if there's anything I can do to help you, let me know. I know that it's different. And I had one that called me back and she was like, several times, her mom is one of my best friends, and her parents, neither one of them went to college. They had no idea how to navigate the system. And so I would help her, even though it was not my campus, just knowing who to ask, where to go to for help, and who's most likely to help you. And that is, I think that's an even bigger struggle for students who are non-residential students. Because it's harder for them to make those campus connections. I work at a technical college, so we're completely non-residential. And so those our students at least, are not necessarily on campus as much as a lot of students would be, just because they're not there. They're going home every day. And so it's a struggle for those students to just to know how to navigate the system, and because they don't understand the jargon that we use as college employees. And so, this is another barrier for them, that, something else that, somebody mentioned FAFSA alone is a nightmare. Absolutely. As the mother of a college student, yes, FAFSA is the bane of my existence. I do not ever look forward to filling that form out. And that's just another one of those things. These are just little things that add up, that, students just throw up their hands and wonder why they're doing this. So this RSIC survey, which looked at specifically community college students, the Revealing Institutional Strengths and Challenges survey, they looked at the top 5 challenges that community college students say impede their academic success. And the first 2, work and paying expenses, are tied. Financial concerns are a huge challenge for our students on every campus. Community college is obviously a lot less expensive than living in dorms and going to a 4-year university, but it's still a huge concern. And these students are juggling so many different things that it's really hard. I think the vast majority of the students on my campus are working at least one job and have kids, to the point that we schedule our spring break around when the public schools have their spring break, so that we know what's a good time of year for our students, so they don't have to try to find childcare for that week while they're in school and working. And their top financial stressors, 71% obviously said living expenses, but books, software, and supplies are ahead of tuition and fees. And that's because they know what their tuition and fees are going to be when they walk in the door of, to go to school. They don't know what their textbooks are going to cost necessarily when they decide to go back to school. There's always these averages that are put out there for, how much textbooks are going to cost. But, I've been at Aiken Tech for 11 years, and I think our textbook costs have been the same the whole time that I've been there. I don't think they've ever changed. So it's not necessarily an accurate portrayal of how much they're actually going to cost. And so it's a big stress on our students to just be able to purchase a book. And that's, there's something that we gotta do. So what happens when we put up barriers to success for our students? And Vicki, I want to address your question real quick. Does anyone use OER to any large degree at a private college? There are some, yes. But it's a challenge at every college, public or private, big or small. But there are some private colleges out there that are working on moving more towards OERs. So yes, they give up, they walk away, they fail their classes. And it's, it's so much easier for them to say, you know what, I'm just gonna go to get a job. I'm not even gonna worry about college anymore because this is too hard. And then they wind up walking away from college with debt and no degree. And so it's not great for our students. What is OER? It's an open educational resource. And that is anything that is, it's resources that are freely available for students to use, so they don't have to pay for access to those materials. So when faculty use OER, we aren't just saving student money on textbooks, we're having a direct impact on their ability to enroll in, persist through, and successfully complete a course. And that's really what the open education movement is about. So how can OERs help? Well, they've also found that students University of Georgia did this study back in 2018, and they looked at 21,000 students. And for courses that changed from non-OER to OER textbooks, their grades went up when they were using OER textbooks. 8% overall, but those Pell eligible students saw a higher increase in their grades than the non-Pell eligible students. And the drop fail withdrawal rates went down. So fewer students were dropping, fewer students were withdrawing, fewer students were failing because they had access to those textbooks on the very first day of class. Ironically, my husband uses OER in both of his courses that he teaches. He teaches physics and astronomy. Not because I encouraged him to do so. He was actually he's been using OERs for about 5 years now. And the reason that he switched to open educational resources is he was frustrated with students not having their textbook on the first day of class. He was tired of it. And so he moved to the OpenStax textbooks for both classes, and the grades in his classes have gone up. The students are more successful, and he no longer has to worry about students just not having access to their textbooks. In a one-year pilot program at Virginia College of Business, they tried for 1 year to replace their textbooks with OER, and they saw a 30 to 40% increase in GPAs. And over $200,000 in student savings in just that 1 year. An OpenStax survey of students found that there was a 47% in grade improvement where OER textbooks were used. 66% of them saw an increase in the subject interest, and 64% found an increase in learning experience satisfaction, and 45% were an increase in lesson engagement. And a lot of that is because once you start to go down the OER road, you find that a lot of faculty also get into open pedagogy. There's some really, really interesting work being done with open pedagogy, and it really involves your students in the lesson, and they just learn. And so this goes back to my interest in learning styles. And so it's all about engaging the students, because not everybody can learn from a lecture. Not everybody can learn from a book. And so when you're giving them a variety of ways to learn the material through open pedagogy, then they're more likely to be more engaged in the subject matter. They're more likely to learn. There is a huge question with OERs about quality, and an absolutely valid question. As somebody who grew up with a mother who is an economics professor, I always heard my whole life, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And and so this is, we all hear about, well, if it's free, then it can't be good. And so that is an absolutely valid question, but there's some really good work being done out there to help people find quality materials when they're looking for open educational resources. And Penn State looked that 70% of their surveyed faculty surveyed found that the quality was better or the same as traditional textbooks. And that they liked them better because they could be adapted or to their use, what they wanted, or they're more likely to be updated on a regular basis. And that's one of the, instead of updating every 3 to 5 years with a lot of textbooks, they can update them, every year, every 6 months if they want to, because there's not this whole publishing process that has to happen with a traditional textbook. And the same was with students. 96% of them found that the quality was at average or above average. And most of them, and a lot of them liked having the OER materials because it was a cost savings. They liked the immediate access and the convenience. You don't always have to have that textbook with you, and just being able to access your course from day one and not have to worry about getting those access codes. So these are some really good places to find open educational resources if you're not sure where to start. And there's 2 on here that are really good for those with more technical fields, and that's OASIS and Skills Commons. I encourage, if you work community or technical college, those are both really good websites to use for some of those more technical fields. But I want to point out the Open Textbook Library in particular, and that's because they have a review process for all of the materials that they include on their website. They have about 800 textbooks on their website, and every textbook that is on there is open to faculty reviews once that faculty member has gone through the Open Education Network workshop that is offered by people who are trained to do so. I know I do it for our campus and our state. And so you can go in and look at those reviews. Anybody can read them. You don't have to attend the workshop to read the reviews, but you can see what other faculty say about those textbooks. And they leave all the textbooks up there, even if they get bad reviews. So those 4 textbook reviews that are 1 point to 1.5, those books are still there. But you can see the vast majority of the materials, these are books who are submitted by the faculty who wrote them. Or OpenStax submits all the OpenStax textbooks to the Open Textbook Library. And the vast majority of these materials get positive reviews. So this is a great place to look for, particularly if you work in kind of more of the survey courses. But there's more materials growing every day with this, and they're getting a little bit more specialized in what they're offering through those.
No.
So I would encourage you to take a look there if you're looking for quality materials. So why does it matter? Get on my soapbox here for just a second. Why I care is, I work in the student success and retention division on my campus, and we talk every day about barriers to success and what we can do to help our students. And if me as a librarian, if I can help one student be a little bit more successful in their college career, then I feel like I'm making a difference that could change their life, could change the track of where they go with their career. And as faculty, we have the ability to impact large groups of students with just a simple choice of what textbook we purchase, because it has a direct impact on their ability to be successful in that class. And so we can affect large groups of people who then can go on to possibly having really successful careers, and being able to pay back their student loans, or to just have a more successful life because of the college education that they got, because we made one small choice that helped them be more successful in college. So I would encourage you to encourage your faculty, your librarians, your administration to think about open educational resources, and just what's something that we can do for our students that will impact them in some small way, that they might be able to put food on the table instead of having to buy a $300 textbook. So that's all I have. If you guys have any questions, I'd be thrilled to discuss with you.
Katie, this is Diane Burnett. I'm sure that there has been a robust side conversation going on.
I see that, yeah.
Window. But there was a question posted very early on in the chat window, and while I'm talking, those of you who have questions, go ahead and load them up, and we will get to them. But someone asked the question with regards to access codes and for lab courses. We talk a lot about textbooks, but there's also the cost increasingly of students having to purchase access codes to get to, for an example, virtual lab materials, supplemental materials, and those are course materials. Many of them are required. So what is your position on access codes?
So there's actually a conference going on this week. The Open Ed conference is virtual this week, and I was attending a session the other day that was talking about the automatic billing with textbooks with inclusive access. And one of the presenters called it a predatory practice. But what they said was that publishers are moving from being in the business of publishing textbooks to being in the business of publishing software. And I am not a fan of access codes. I understand why faculty like them. The course packs, I totally understand. But there is an increasing amount of OERs that now have those course packs available with, so OpenStax, most of the OpenStax textbooks now have course packs to go with them. And a lot of the OpenStax stuff, they have partnerships with companies who have created test banks and PowerPoint presentations and materials. And well, they have all that stuff for instructors that the community has created, but they've also created some stuff that that students can purchase. But their agreement with these companies was that those things had to be affordable. And I think the agreement was that they could not be more than $40 per student. And so there are definitely options out there if you feel like that's something that you need for your course. But yeah, access codes. I have so many faculty on my campus that I can't get them to move away. Move away from them because they've become so reliant on them. But I don't like them. I wish that they didn't exist. Do I have a system for those who need access codes? Unfortunately, no, because they're one student. And a lot of times with those courses, they'll give free access for a short period of time. And I've had discussions with our math department about how they have students who are trying to finish their entire math class in those 2 weeks so that they don't have to purchase the access code.
Here's a question that's been...
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Goodwin.
Oh, this is a question that's been constantly asked. What are your thoughts on LibreText?
I can't say that I have any strong thoughts about them one way or the other. I'm not terribly familiar with LibreText, but I don't have a really strong opinion about them. I can talk all day long about access codes, though.
Well, I'm glad that you can, because there was one additional follow-up question posted in the chat window, and I believe this Amber Aiken, I believe this question was posed to you. Katie, it says you'd mentioned that you had options for students who had to wait for financial aid, such as temporary use of textbooks in the library. Do you have a similar system for those who need access codes?
Yeah, and that's I did answer that for Amber. Yeah, we don't, because those access codes are per student, and so it's impossible for them to access, for multiple students to access that material. So if we had an access code, we could only give it to one person. So there's not, unfortunately, not a way for us to do that.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad I didn't, you're right.
No, you're fine.
Answer that question. Okay, any more questions coming in from the audience?
None at this time.
And we are gonna, the links for everything are here. They're at the end of the presentation. And we are gonna provide those tools to, or that, all these slides to everybody.
We have another question. Is there a website that focuses on nutrition?
So one of the things that I learned very early on with OER, when one of the workshops I attended, is if you go out and search for OER and a specific topic, you will find lib guides that are created by librarians on pretty much any topic you're looking for open educational resources. I would also encourage you to look, if you haven't looked at the Open Textbook Library, I do believe that there's a couple things on nutrition in there. Yeah, just a simple Google search of OER and whatever topic you're looking for. I did see some discussion about foreign languages going on beforehand, and that is an area where OER has not caught up with some of the other areas. I know it's a challenge for that area, and I do wish there was a little bit more development happening. It sounds like there's a German project going on, but what we really would love to, I would love to see is Spanish and French, because those are, I think, the most common language areas. And so if you know anybody out there that would be interested, encourage them to do so, because I think it would be a very popular project. It would be a great grant project if somebody wants to make that happen.
Okay, Katie. Well, I think we just about covered everything. Mrs. Goodwin, is there anything else in the chat window?
Other questions?
To O. Murphy, there is check out OpenRN. It's a project coming out of Wisconsin, and they've published the first 2 books, but there's 2 more coming. And it's it's grant funded by the federal government. And there's a bunch of virtual reality scenarios going with that project. So it's a great project. I encourage you to check it out.
Okay, well, Katie, if you want to stop sharing your screen, and then I'll wrap things up with a few reminders. Again, I'd like to thank Katie for this excellent presentation today. She provided not only great information, but a wealth of resources. There's also was a lot of information that was posted into the chat window. There was a lot of great sharing going on, both online as well as in the chat window. So I thank you to our participants and Mrs. Goodwin for monitoring the chat window for us. We really, really do appreciate it. Before we wrap things up, I just want to remind everyone, if you joined us late and you did not have a chance to put your name and your institutional affiliation in the chat window, please do that, because we're going to use that to make sure that we have a record of attendance, as well as we'll be able to send you a link to our evaluation, to the evaluation for this webinar. This is interesting because there has been a few comments made with regards to certain subject matter resources of OER not being available. So Again, our next program in our webinar series, it just so happens that it's going to be talking about how you can create and customize OER content. Scheduled for January 21st, 2:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our featured speaker in our next webinar is Melinda Boland, who is the Director of OER Services at OER Commons. Again, Melinda will discuss how you can customize as well as author or create OER content using the tools that are available through the OER Commons website. So that's very timely and coming up next month. Just as a reminder, you may register for the January 21st webinar by visiting our project website at the URL listed below on this screen. Once you get to the page, click on webinar at the link to webinars at the top of the page. You will also see the recording from this session as well as our previous webinar sessions posted on that page. And we will also make sure that we get a copy of Katie Miller's PowerPoint slides posted there as well. Give us a few days to get all of this up there, but we will definitely make it available on our website so that you'll be able to harvest the links to those wonderful resources that she had on the end of her slides. And finally, as a reminder, we are on social media, so you can stay informed about our project events and other resources available through the HBCU Academic Librarians OER project by visiting us on Twitter or following us on Twitter or joining our Facebook group at HBCU Affordable Learning. So once again, thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Miller, for your excellent presentation today. It was very informative, and hopefully we'll see everyone back in January for the third installment of our professional development webinar series. Thank you very much and have a wonderful and safe day.
Have an awesome night.